everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer before we get started, is that you see in this picture in the video, it is a representation of what my office kind of looks like. And that little kitten that is showing hanging off the microphone, that is very much a reality. And she has been bouncing on and off my desk all evening as I'm trying to record. She did just kind of walk out of the room, but she may pop herself back in here. So if you hear any weird noises on the microphone, sounds like things are being chewed on, or some heavy purring or even suckling noises because she's decided that my shirt tastes very good, that is just my little opal making herself known as a content creator. But moving on from that, this video comes about after some serious reflections and introspection in recent weeks. Taking that time to really reflect on myself is something that I do on the regular. I wouldn't consider myself a decent therapist or clinical supervisor if I didn't keep myself in check and continue to reflect and dig a little deeper into my own actions or beliefs, because this is where our biases can hide. However, recently it's been more than that. A few weeks ago, I posted on another platform a picture of my altar for Samhain. And for clarity's sake, I dubbed it a combination of an altar and an ofrenda for Dia de los Muertos. And I did get some negative feedback for that. I recognize when you put yourself out on public platforms, you open yourself up to criticism. And normally I would welcome that because that's how growth happens. However, this criticism was unfounded. And I say that because it was brought on by misunderstanding. I won't go into a long dialogue about it now because I will explain a bit more as we continue. But Dia de los Muertos and Samhain are nearly identical in their practices, including the use of an altar, or an ofrenda as it's called in the Hispanic culture. My own practices celebrate the link between the two. Ultimately, though, this conversation led me to wanting to be more open about the practices I share in this space and explain where I'm coming from. This video also serves as a promise to you all, my listeners and viewers, as I'm moving forward into this new year. I've done some other videos where I've explained a little bit about who I am and more along the lines of my work as a therapist. I've discussed some about my own beliefs within the realm of my professional standing. And I've also talked a little bit about my own self-care practices and how that came off. But today I wanted to talk about who I am and what I stand for. So I come into this work not just as a therapist or a spiritual practitioner, but as someone trained in cultural diversity throughout my professional field. I've spent years learning and also training others how to hold space for people of all backgrounds, how to listen, how to honor, how to never assume. That training shaped me and it shaped my practice. But the reality is my life itself heavily shaped me before I ever stepped foot in the door of a mental health office, before I ever even finished my bachelor's degree in psychology. I am a white woman. I have benefited from white privilege. That's not something that I deny. It's something that I acknowledge, examine, and actively work to dismantle in myself and in the spaces I create. I don't consider myself someone who portrays privilege. I consider myself someone who uses awareness to foster equity, healing, and connection. I've been told more than once, unfortunately, that white people don't have culture, especially here in the American Southwest, where being white is often equated with being disconnected, generic, or even culturally blank. Oftentimes, just because of the color of my skin, people assume that I am racist. They assume that I have beliefs against other cultures that just are not true. And I know what oftentimes people believe when they just look at me because of the color of my skin is not true. Culture is not just the color of your skin or the country of your birth. And this is not me just saying this today. This is part of years worth of training on cultural diversity that we have received. Culture is memory. It's ritual. It's the way your grandmother stirred the pot, the way your family marked the seasons and celebrated them. It's the stories passed down in whispers and song. My culture is layered. It's Irish and Scottish predominantly. I come from a Celtic background, but also it's German, Swedish, French, and yes, even though it's hard to see when you look at me, Spanish and Native American. My culture is Southern and Southwestern. It's Christian and folk rooted. It's ancestral and it's evolving. And it's expressed through ritual, storytelling, healing, and the sacred blending of traditions. I am one of the most open and accepting people you will meet. And I'm not just saying that to toot my own horn. This is what I have been told by numerous people over the years. I don't just welcome diversity, I celebrate it. I don't just respect other cultures, I learn from them, honor them, and uplift them. I believe in spiritual integrity, cultural humility, and the power of shared wisdom. This is not just my practice, it's my promise to be transparent, to be teachable, to be a bridge, not a barrier. So it's important as we continue to understand that culture is more than just what meets the eye. We often talk about culture as if it's a single story, one language, one religion, one set of traditions. But the truth is, what we often see, or what others often see as our quote unquote real culture, is often just on the surface. Beneath it lives a mosaic of ancestral memory, migration, and influence woven into our very DNA in ways we may not even be aware of. Many of us carry lineages that were hidden, forgotten, or erased by colonization, assimilation, or even, unfortunately, because of pure survival. But they're still there. I am living proof of that complexity because of my many cultural backgrounds. So my rituals may look like a tapestry of many cultures, and it's because they are. My rituals blend all of who I am, not as appropriation, but as remembrance. So culture is not just what you were born into. It's not just the color of your skin for certain. Culture lives not only in our bloodlines, but in bone memory. It's the echo of our ancestors. It's in the way we move through the world. It's the way our spirit responds to rhythm, to the sacred, those symbols that stir our hearts, the rituals that feel like home, even when we've never been taught them. It's in the foods, songs, and stories that stir something ancient within us. It's in the way we light a candle with intention, sweep a floor with prayer, or feel the pull of the moon in our chest. These are not coincidences. They are echoes, resonances of folk magic traditions that, though born of different lands and histories, speak a shared language of earth, spirit, and survival. Across continents and centuries, folk magic tradition has always been about survival, healing, and connection. Whether practiced in the Appalachian Hills, the deserts of the Southwest, or the misty fields of Ireland, these traditions all honor the land, all use local herbs, stones, and elements as sacred tools. They also focus on the protection of the home. Doorways, thresholds, and hearths are seen as spiritual boundaries, and things are done to protect them, lock them, or create a boundary that no harm can pass. They also invoke the ancestors through rituals that often call in those who came before for guidance and strength. And they blend practicality with spirit. Folk magic is deeply functional. It's used for healing, protection, and so many other things that are part of our daily lives. These connections aren't coincidence. They are born of sacred human needs and the resilience of spirit. Forced migration and colonization brought these traditions into contact. Enslaved Africans, displaced indigenous peoples, and Irish immigrants all carried their magic into new lands, as well as so many other peoples that I'm not mentioning today. Adaptation and the blending of cultures allow these practices to survive, fusing with each other while retaining their core truths. The land itself also shaped rituals. Practitioners used what was available: cedar in the southwest, rowan in the highlands, basil in the bayous. But these threads stretch even further back. Long before the colonial entanglements of Great Britain and then the Americas, the Roman Empire reshaped the spiritual terrain of Europe. As Rome expanded, it absorbed and overlaid the sacred traditions of Celtic, Iberian, Germanic, and Gallic peoples. Sacred groves were replaced with temples, yet the reverence for trees and stones endured. Local deities were renamed or merged with Roman gods, creating layered pantheons that still echo in folk traditions and seasonal rites. Rituals honoring hearth spirits, fertility, and the turning of the year persisted, though hidden in plain sight through Christian saints, feast days, and domestic customs. For example, Samhain, the Celtic festival marking the thinning of the veil, became All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, with ancestral offerings transformed into cemetery visits, soul cakes, and candlelight vigil. Yet the core remained, honoring the dead, protecting the home, and marking the darkening of the year. Halloween traditions also have its echoes in Samhain, in the wearing of costumes and the carving of pumpkins, and other traditions such as trick or treating that are tied to certain rituals that involved protecting the home and protecting the individuals from other spirits or fae or entities that could cross through the veil during the time of Samhain. And as I mentioned earlier, as talking about Samhain and these traditions about All Saints' Day and All Souls' Days, you can then also see the interconnectedness to Dia de los Muertos as what kind of started my journey into doing this more explanation about my practices and where they come from. Yule, the midwinter solstice celebration of rebirth and light, was folded into Christmas. The Yule log became a hearth tradition. Evergreens, which were symbolized from eternal life and decorated as a celebration of Yule, became what we now know as the Christmas tree. And waysailing, once a fertility rite for orchards, evolved into caroling. And there are many other traditions that we tie into Christmas that actually have its birth in Yule. Ostra, the spring equinox festival of renewal and fertility, is echoed in Easter. Eggs, rabbits, and blooming flowers, once sacred to the goddess Yostre, were reimagined as symbols of resurrection and rebirth. Even Imbolc, a fire festival of purification and the first stirrings of spring, was rebranded as Candlemas, honoring Saint Brigid, who bears the name and attributes of the older goddess Brigid, guardian of hearth, healing, and poetry. These transformations didn't culminate with a full erasure. They became adaptations. The sacred rhythms of the year continued to beat beneath new names, carried forward in kitchens, gardens, and quiet acts of devotion. The ancient colonization seeded a long lineage of spiritual resilience that exists still today. Folk traditions adapted, braided, and survived, becoming the quiet carriers of ancestral rhythm beneath empire, church, and modernity. As one scholar put it, these traditions are rivers fed by many springs, each unique, yet flowing towards the same sacred source. And like rivers, they do not remain still. They move, they nourish, they shape the land they touch. So, what began as seasonal rites and sacred ceremonies across multiple cultures now flows into the everyday, into the way we stir our tea, sweep our floors, speak our intentions. In this way, ritual becomes practice. It leaves the temple and enters the kitchen. It steps down from the altar and walks beside us. Now, I've used the term ritual, and magic quite frequently through here. But I want you to understand that ritual is the doorway, practice is the path. What begins as a sacred moment at the altar, a whispered prayer over herbs, a circle cast beneath the moon, becomes something more enduring when woven into the rhythm of daily life. And in today's world, that rhythm often takes shape of self care. Folk magic has always known this. Healing isn't a one time spell, but a lived devotion. The same hands that anoint a candle also stir the soup, sweep the floor, braid the child's hair. In this way, ritual becomes practice not separate from life, but inseparable from it. What our ancestors did to survive, tending the hearth, honoring the seasons, invoking protection, has become what we do now to soothe, to restore, to remember ourselves whole. Lighting a candle becomes a moment of mindfulness. Anointing with oils becomes a sensory ritual of grounding. Herbal teas and baths become acts of nervous system repair. And journaling intention mirrors the old practice of spellcraft and prayer. These aren't new inventions, they're ancestral echoes, reimagined for modern life. Self care at its root is soul care. It's the continuation of folk wisdom in a world that often forgets to pause. It's how we reclaim rest as resistance, ritual as resilience, and presence as power. These are not grand gestures, but quiet revolutions, acts of care that root us in the sacred now. In reclaiming these practices, we remember that magic is not only what we do, but how we live. Long before mindfulness became a buzzword in modern wellness, it was embedded in folk magic as a sacred way of being. These traditions taught presence not through apps or mantras, but through ritual, rhythm, and reverence. Stillness was considered medicine. Sitting with the land, listening to the wind, watching a candle flame, these were all acts of healing. Breath as invocation, breathwork appeared in chants, smoke cleansing, and prayer. Each inhale a call, each exhale a release. Repetition was ritual, stirring clockwise, knotting chords, tracing symbols. These repetitive acts grounded the practitioner in intention and awareness, and also embodied connection, where movement based rituals like circle dances, sweeping with besoms, a broom, or walking labyrinths cultivated somatic presence and spiritual alignment. As folk healing evolved, these meditative elements became the foundation for modern self care rituals. Herbal teas, once brewed for spiritual clarity, are now sipped for stress relief. Baths infused with salt and herbs, once used for spiritual cleaning, are now marketed as mindfulness soaks. Affirmations echo ancestral prayers, offering daily grounding and emotional resilience. Seasonal rituals like solstice altars or moon journaling reconnect us to cyclical time and inner reflection. Recognizing the folk roots of mindfulness restores dignity to ancestral wisdom and deepens our understanding of healing. It honors the cultures that birthed these practices, often marginalized or appropriated. It reminds us that self care is not indulgent, but survival, especially for those historically denied rest and safety. It invites us to reclaim ritual as a tool for resilience, connection, and transformation. So, my practice then is a braid of ancestral threads, each one distinct yet harmonizing across time, land, and lineage. As I mentioned earlier, I carry Irish, Scottish, and Celtic roots, Southern and Southwestern upbringing, and ancestral ties to German, Swedish, Spanish, French, and Native American traditions. These cultures didn't just coexist, they blended, adapted, and evolved together. And their rituals speak to one another like old friends remembering a shared song. Each tradition I carry is a thread in the tapestry of my practice, distinct in origin, yet harmonized through shared symbols, rhythm, and sacred acts. Each of these traditions speaks to my lineage and lived experience. They don't compete, they converse. They remind me that healing is not bound by borders, but carried in breath, in bone, in memory. It is important to include, though, a note on reverence and respect. Some traditions are closed, held in trust by specific cultures, lineages, and communities. These practices are not ours to claim, replicate, or reinterpret without imitation. They are sacred, living systems of knowledge, often born of survival, resistance, and deep ancestral ties. So, this reflection does not speak to appropriate or generalize as we're talking about ritual practice, but to honor the shared human impulse towards ritual, healing, and connection. Across time and geography, people have turned to the land, the elements, and the unseen for guidance. While the names and forms differ, the heart of these practices often echoes the same truth: protect the home, tend the spirit, honor the turning of the year. These echoes don't live only in stories or ceremonies, they live in my hands, my home, my breath. They are not borrowed, they are remembered, not stitched together from fragments, but braided from living threads that speak through rhythm, symbol, and sacred act. So, just as what started me on this introspection that led to this video, I do want to talk about cultural blending versus cultural appropriation. So, some may see my rituals and ask, is this yours to use? And I answer, it is mine to honor. My practice is not imitation, it is integration. It's the natural result of migration, memory, and the mingling of people across time. I do not claim what is mine. I acknowledge the roots, the history, the pain, and the beauty as I practice. I practice with reverence, not replication. I blend with intention, not imitation. And I share with humility, not entitlement. Because my body is a map of migrations, my spirit is a bridge between traditions, and my practice is a prayer to all who came before. Blending these traditions is not just spiritual, it's healing, and it's how I care for myself, how I root into belonging, and how I create rituals that feel like home. This is how I tend my spirit, how I honor my ancestors, and how I offer healing to others. So, I want to take some time now and talk about ritual elements across time and tradition, and really looking into some of the things that I've already included in multiple videos, from the discussion of mudras and trauma informed yoga, moving into meditative practices and things that I do within my meditations, some of what I call the spicy psychology side of things, and also look into what I hope to bring to you in the coming year. The first one I'm going to talk about is brooms and thresholds. And this is a practice that I hope to be able to share with you soon. I've been wanting to do it for a while, but the weather has always gotten in the way because it has to do with a doorway. And it is really hot here in the desert Southwest. And it just hasn't been a good time for me to ever do this. But as things are cooling down, and once these few days of rain, really big rain that we've had, have kind of washed away, I hope to be able to spend some time and actually record myself doing this cleansing of my door. And it will also be tied to the fact that I need to paint my front door because the elements have worn it down over the years since I last painted it. But this tradition is understanding that brooms sweep away spiritual debris and are placed near doorways in certain fashions to guard the home. And different traditions have different ways to place the brooms, but some of them, again, are also very similar. The use of different colors, salt, symbols, sigils, um, smoking also may be used to mark thresholds as spaces of protection. So, across traditions, the doorway is sacred. It's a boundary, a blessing, and a place to cleanse and claim. Next would be herbs and smoke. Plants like rosemary, cedar, basil, and mugwort are used to cleanse the body, space, and spirit. Some are burned, others are steeped in tea, some are bundled, or they may even be swept over the body with prayer and intention. So, in many traditions, herbs are more than just tools, they're kin, healers, and messengers. Prayer and charm is also really important as we go through it. I may not specifically use the term prayer because I don't tie religion into any of the practices that I do, because religion is something that is, even, I think, in many ways more personal to people, and what I may believe as my own religious beliefs do not match with others. And I am more spiritual in my practice than I am religious. However, prayer and spirit do go hand in hand because sacred words are whispered over candles, oils, and charms. Prayers may be spoken in rhythm, they're repeated in threes, they're traced in gesture. And wherever spirit meets speech, prayer becomes spell or intention, and healing becomes holy and sacred. And I want to take a moment before I move on to talk about the repeated in threes. A few days ago, I did create another video called The Power of Three, and I kind of giggled as I said that because it made me feel like I needed to be in an episode of Charmed. But threes are very powerful throughout rituals, and there's a lot of reasons why. So I invite you to take a moment to go back and watch that video too and see how that is tied into the ritual practices that I engage in and the reasons for it. Next, moving into charm bags and other sacred tools. So, small bundles of herbs, stones, or cloth may be carried for protection, clarity, or blessing. Like some people may carry crystals in their pocket, or they may carry it like in a pouch close to their heart, to provide that protection for themselves with it. Some people put them in their cars, they may place them around their home. But these, again, are tools for protection. Use of other totems, such as dolls, maybe even having feathers or other tokens, are often too crafted with intention and placed in sacred spaces. So, across time, people have known when intention is held in the hand, it becomes power. Then there is fire and light. Candles are lit for healing, remembrance, and transformation. Fires mark the turning of seasons, the release of grief, or the welcoming of life. Fire is considered a portal in many traditions. It's a purifier and a prayer in motion. And lastly, we leave with sound and song. Healing songs, chants, and rhythmic drumming call spirit, soothe grief, and stir memory. Rattles, bells, and breath become instruments of vibration and intention. Sound is sacred, voice is vibration, music is medicine. So these rituals are not fragments, they are echoes. They remind me that culture is not a single thread, but a woven cloth. And as I've already mentioned, my rituals blend the traditions of my ancestry and the land in which I was raised and the roots that shaped my family. These practices may look eclectic, but they are not random. They are inherited. They are remembered. They are the natural result of the interweaving of cultures over centuries. So, from the Celts, I've learned that the land remembers, that our bones carry the songs of our ancestors, and mine sing in many languages. Throughout my ancestry, I have learned to carry the reverence for thresholds, stones, and seasonal rites. I've inherited that fierce protection and herbal wisdom. I honor traditions of smoke, prayer, and earth medicine. I draw on hearth magic, runes, and ancestral altars, and embrace healing touch and spiritual cleansing. I also understand of traditions that have been brought across time and across place. And remembering once again that these traditions did not meet by accident. They met through migration, survival, and shared sacred need. They brought magic across oceans. They forced people into new forms, blending, adapting, resisting, and they became crossroads of culture where all these different traditions mingled with Native and European rites. These traditions didn't just survive, but over generations, these practices braided together, not as theft, but as kinship, as remembrance and resilience. And now, this is one of the most important parts, and where I tie this into therapeutic practice, science is catching up to what our ancestors always knew. And I've spoken about this in other videos, but I want to just address it once again. This is what I call spicy psychology. It's the way that ancient practices, what we know deep within our bones, once dismissed as superstition, are now being validated by neuroscience and trauma research. Sound healing and chanting activate the vagus nerve, which regulate the nervous system and increase dopamine and serotonin. Mudras and breath work support emotional regulation and trauma recovery by grounding the body in the present moment. Trauma informed yoga has shown to reduce the symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and depression by reconnecting people with their bodies in safe and empowering ways. Somatic practices like movement, dance, and other sensory rituals help release stored trauma and restore a sense of personal agency. Meditation and mindfulness improve cognitive flexibility, reduce rumination, and foster emotional resilience. Reiki and crystal healing, often considered alternative, are increasingly studied for their effects on stress reduction and energetic balance. Rituals involving song, rhythm, and movement, from the Celtic keening to indigenous drumming, are now recognized for their role in community bonding and emotional catharsis. These aren't just spiritual tools, they're therapeutic, they're embodied, and they're becoming more and more evidence based. This video, as we're wrapping up, though, is more than just a ritual guide and more than just an explanation. It's a reflection of my own personal evolution. It's a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern healing, and a love letter to the practices that have helped me come home to myself. As I grow older, I find myself circling back to the roots that I once took for granted, and even some of those roots that I had not learned before because of assimilation or things that had to be hidden for protection, such as, as I mentioned, having that Native American ancestry that was not celebrated within my family until honestly just a few years ago as we did DNA research. It was something that was always kind of whispered, oh, we do have ancestry, we do have ancestry. We must become, because we come from Oklahoma. My dad used to joke about that, and yeah, DNA proved it. And so it's why I wasn't grown up in it, but it is something that has always spoken to me because, again, it is in my blood, it is in my bones. So this really is part of that return to my roots, a deeper exploration of who I am, where I come from, and also how I want to serve and help others to heal. Another reflection that I have in this is that I was raised Christian. I no longer directly practice within a specific church or a specific religion, but that Christian foundation taught me reverence. It taught me prayer, and it taught me the sacredness of love. But woven through my family's stories and quiet rituals were those older threads of Celtic folk and ancestral traditions, practices that some might call pagan, that were just normal and natural within our home. And I see them as earth honoring, spirit led, and just deeply human. And that is why I say that I'm not necessarily still Christian. I do believe in Christianity. I do believe in Christ, and I'm not going to get into a whole religious explanation right here. But because of my other beliefs, oftentimes that do not go hand in hand with the church. It may go hand in hand with traditional teachings that are not a part of church practice anymore. So that is why I focus more on spirituality and what is most important to me and what calls to me. So I don't claim a single label. I'm not just Christian. I'm not pagan. I'm not a yogi or a folk witch, although someone I know would argue with me on that witch thing. But I am holistically spiritual. I believe in the sacredness of breath, the wisdom of the body, and the healing power of ritual. So, as we kind of come to a close today, and sorry, my kitten has decided to start climbing up on me and is making it really hard for me to talk. I want to end with my commitment moving forward. This video is also, again, a threshold for me. It's a commitment to continuing integrating trauma informed yoga and mudras into my offerings to each of you, to get back to those videos and utilizing the different card decks that I originally introduced that show these practices and help to understand them in very simple but very fluid ways, to get back to deepening my meditation and breathwork practices. As you've seen within recent months, it has increased much more, and I'm developing other ritual practices into my meditation above and beyond just relaxation. I want to honor the rituals of my ancestors while making them accessible and inclusive to everyone, and share the science behind the sacred so others can feel empowered, not mystified by these tools. Because healing isn't just about looking back, it's about weaving the past into the present with intention, compassion, and joy.